When HOA President Margaret Stevens walks into Judge Judy's courtroom, she has no idea she's about to become the most humiliated person on daytime television. What happens next leaves the entire courtroom speechless and exposes a shocking secret that will destroy her life forever. This isn't just another Karen meltdown. This is the moment a neighborhood tyrant discovers that real power doesn't come from a clipboard and a bad attitude. Watch until the end, because Judge Judy's 7th response will send chills down your spine and prove why she's the most feared judge in America. Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. It started like any other Tuesday morning in Judge Judy's iconic courtroom. The familiar theme music echoed through the halls, cameras positioned perfectly to capture every moment of legal drama. Bailiff Byrd stood at attention, his arms crossed and his expression serious. The gallery filled with curious spectators, some clutching tissues already knowing they were about to witness something unforgettable. Papers shuffled, phones buzzed on silent, and the low murmur of whispered conversations created that electric atmosphere that only Judge Judy's courtroom could deliver. The plaintiff, a soft-spoken elderly man named Harold Martinez, sat nervously adjusting his tie, reviewing his notes one final time. He had no idea he was about to become a supporting character in the most explosive courtroom confrontation ever recorded. Then the doors opened. Margaret Stevens entered the courtroom like she owned the place, her perfectly pressed blazer adorned with a golden HOA president pin that caught the studio lights. Her hair was styled into that unmistakable Karen cut, and her eyes scanned the room with the cold calculation of someone who had spent years terrorizing her neighbors. She clutched a thick manila folder against her chest, her knuckles white with tension. What nobody knew, not even Judge Judy herself, was that inside that folder lay evidence of crimes that went far beyond petty HOA violations. Margaret had been running an illegal scheme that had stolen thousands of dollars from homeowners, and today was the day her entire world would collapse. Judge Judy took her place behind the bench, her sharp eyes immediately locking onto Margaret's defiant posture. The legendary judge had seen thousands of cases, dealt with every type of personality imaginable, but something about Margaret's arrogant smirk told her this wasn't going to be an ordinary day. The bailiff called the court to order. Harold began to speak about his garden gnome citation, and that's when Margaret made her first fatal mistake. She opened her mouth and interrupted the most powerful woman on daytime television. "Your Honor, I need to speak immediately." Margaret's voice cut through Harold's testimony like a knife through butter. The entire courtroom froze. Judge Judy's pen stopped mid-signature, her head slowly turning toward Margaret with the kind of deadly calm that had made grown men weep on national television. Harold's mouth hung open, his words dying in his throat as every pair of eyes in the room shifted to the woman who had just committed courtroom suicide. The camera operators instinctively zoomed in, sensing they were about to capture television gold. Margaret stood up from her seat in the gallery, her HOA pin glinting under the harsh studio lights, completely oblivious to the fact that she had just declared war on the wrong person. Judge Judy's eyebrows raised slightly, the only sign that she was processing what had just happened. In 25 years of presiding over this courtroom, she had dealt with every type of disrespectful defendant, every variety of courtroom outburst, but never had someone interrupted her from the gallery during opening statements. "Excuse me?" Judge Judy's voice was dangerously quiet, the kind of tone that prosecutors knew meant someone was about to get obliterated. Margaret, however, mistook this for an invitation to continue. She clutched her mysterious folder tighter and took a step forward, her chin raised with the kind of misplaced confidence that only comes from years of bullying defenseless neighbors. "I said I need to speak, Your Honor. This man," Margaret pointed an accusatory finger at poor Harold, "is lying about the facts of this case. As the HOA president, I have authority here." The audacity was breathtaking. Bailiff Byrd's hand instinctively moved toward his utility belt, not out of any real threat, but because his 20 years of courtroom experience told him this situation was about to explode. The gallery murmured in disbelief, some spectators covering their mouths in shock, others pulling out their phones to record what was clearly going to be an unforgettable moment. Judge Judy's face remained stone cold, but those who knew her well could see the storm brewing behind her eyes. "Ma'am, you will sit down and you will remain quiet until I call you to testify, if I choose to call you at all." Judge Judy's words were precise, each syllable delivered with surgical precision. But Margaret was too drunk on her own perceived power to recognize the warning. She had spent so many years terrorizing elderly homeowners, intimidating young families, and wielding her HOA authority like a weapon that she genuinely believed her power extended beyond her gated community. The folder in her hands seemed to give her confidence, as if whatever was inside somehow made her untouchable. Margaret's second interruption came just 3 minutes later, right as Harold was describing the emotional impact of being fined for his deceased wife's memorial garden gnome. "That's completely irrelevant to HOA regulations," she shouted, her voice echoing off the courtroom walls. This time Judge Judy's pen didn't just stop, she set it down completely and folded her hands. The gesture was small, but everyone in that courtroom knew it meant Margaret had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Harold's eyes filled with tears, not just from reliving the memory of his wife, but from the cruel interruption of someone who clearly had no understanding of human decency. "Strike two," Judge Judy said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper but somehow more menacing than if she had shouted. Margaret either didn't hear the warning or chose to ignore it. She was operating on a level of entitlement that defied logic. Convinced that her position as HOA president gave her some kind of legal immunity. The truth was, Margaret had been getting away with so much for so long that she had lost all sense of boundaries. What she didn't know was that inside her own folder lay evidence that would soon expose her as more than just a petty tyrant. She was a criminal. The third interruption came when Judge Judy was asking Harold about the specific HOA violation notice. Margaret shot up from her seat like a rocket, her folder waving in the air. "Your Honor, you don't understand the complexities of homeowner association law." The words hung in the air like a challenge. The courtroom had gone from shocked silence to anticipatory tension. Everyone could feel it building. The moment when Judge Judy would finally unleash the fury that Margaret was so foolishly provoking. But the legendary judge had incredible self-control, and she was saving her ammunition for maximum impact. Little did Margaret know she was walking straight into a trap that would destroy not just her case but her entire life. Margaret's fourth interruption shattered every remaining thread of courtroom decorum. "Your Honor, with all due respect, you're not understanding the legal framework that governs homeowner associations." She was now standing fully upright, her voice carrying the kind of condescending tone usually reserved for explaining basic concepts to children. The folder in her hands had become a prop, waved around like some kind of legal shield that she believed made her untouchable. Judge Judy's knuckles went white as she gripped the edge of her bench. And for the first time in the legendary judge's career, her poker face cracked just enough to reveal the volcanic rage building beneath the surface. "Ma'am, are you a lawyer?" Judge Judy's question cut through the air with surgical precision. Margaret's chest puffed out with pride, completely missing the trap being set for her. "No, Your Honor, but I am an HOA president with extensive training in community governance and property law compliance." The words tumbled out of her mouth with the confidence of someone who had never been challenged by anyone more intimidating than a frightened homeowner. What Margaret didn't realize was that Judge Judy had just given her enough rope to hang herself with, and she was about to use every inch of it. The fifth interruption came during Harold's testimony about his late wife's medical bills, which explained why he couldn't afford the HOA's escalating fines. Margaret bolted upright again, her voice dripping with disgust. "Personal financial problems don't excuse violations of community standards." The cruelty was breathtaking. Harold's face crumpled and several people in the gallery gasped audibly. Judge Judy's eyes narrowed to laser points and her voice dropped to that deadly whisper that had made her famous. "Strike 3, 4, and 5. You're running out of chances, ma'am." But Margaret was beyond reasoning. The power had gone to her head years ago, and now she was drunk on the attention, convinced that she was winning some kind of battle against the establishment. Her sixth interruption was the nuclear option, the moment she crossed from disrespectful to delusional. As Judge Judy began to explain the legal standard for HOA enforcement, Margaret stood up and delivered the line that would seal her fate forever. "Your Honor, I have been the HOA president for 8 years. I have authority over property values, community standards, and neighborhood safety. I demand the respect that my position deserves in this courtroom." Her voice had risen to a near shout, and she was pointing her finger directly at Judge Judy like she was scolding a subordinate. The audacity was so complete, so mind-blowing, that even the camera operators forgot to keep filming for a moment. Bailiff Byrd took a step forward, his hand resting on his radio, ready to call for backup if this woman completely lost her mind. Judge Judy stood up slowly from her chair, her full height commanding the attention of every person in that courtroom. The silence was deafening. Margaret finally seemed to realize that something had shifted, that perhaps she had pushed too far, but it was already too late. The folder in her hands was trembling now, and the confident smirk had faded from her face. Judge Judy's eyes locked onto Margaret's with the intensity of a predator who had finally cornered her prey. The seventh response was coming, and everyone in that courtroom knew it was going to be legendary. Judge Judy's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade forged in pure authority. "Ma'am, since you seem so eager to educate this court about your qualifications, Let's examine exactly what kind of HOA president you really are. Margaret's confident smirk began to falter as Judge Judy reached for a stack of papers that had been sitting ominously on her desk throughout the entire proceeding. These weren't Harold's documents, these were something else entirely, something that made Margaret's mysterious folder suddenly seem insignificant. I have here 17 complaints filed against you personally with the State Housing Authority. 17. The color drained from Margaret's face like water from a broken dam. Her hands trembled as she clutched her folder tighter, the same folder that she had been waving around like a weapon just moments before. Judge Judy continued reading. From the official documents, her voice steady and merciless. Discriminatory enforcement of HOA rules. Targeted harassment of elderly residents. Illegal fee assessments. And my personal favorite, threatening to foreclose on a 92-year-old woman because her roses were 2 inches too tall. The gallery erupted in shocked murmurs, and Margaret's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Your Honor, those complaints are baseless. I was protecting property values. Margaret's voice cracked with desperation, but Judge Judy wasn't finished. She held up another document, this one stamped with official seals that made Margaret's eyes widen in recognition. This is a federal investigation report into your HOA's financial practices. It seems you've been charging illegal administrative fees and pocketing the money, $57,000 over 3 years. The number hung in the air like a death sentence, and Margaret actually staggered backward as if she had been physically struck. The courtroom had gone completely silent except for the sound of Margaret's labored breathing. Harold sat in stunned amazement, finally understanding that his garden gnome case had uncovered something far bigger than anyone had imagined. Judge Judy's eyes never left Margaret's face as she delivered the killing blow. You want to talk about authority, ma'am? Let me tell you about real authority. Real authority doesn't come from bullying widowed seniors or stealing money from hardworking families. Real authority comes from the law, and the law says you're looking at federal charges for embezzlement and civil rights violations. Margaret's legs gave out, and she collapsed back into her seat with a thud that echoed through the courtroom. Her precious folder scattered across the floor, revealing pages covered in her own handwriting, notes about which residents to target, next which violations to manufacture, which families had enough money to make harassment profitable. The evidence of her systematic cruelty was literally spread across the courtroom floor for everyone to see. If you're loving watching this neighborhood tyrant get completely destroyed, smash that like button, because Judge Judy's 7th response is about to deliver the knockout punch that will end Margaret's reign of terror forever. Margaret Stevens made one final desperate attempt to salvage her crumbling world. Rising from her seat like a phoenix trying to emerge from its own ashes, she opened her mouth for the 7th and final time. Your Honor, you don't understand. But Judge Judy's hand shot up like a stop sign forged from pure judicial authority, cutting Margaret off mid-sentence with a gesture so powerful it seemed to suck all the oxygen from the room. The legendary judge's eyes had transformed from annoyed to absolutely volcanic, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 25 years of courtroom dominance and zero tolerance for fools. Ma'am. Judge Judy's voice started quietly, almost conversationally, which somehow made it infinitely more terrifying than if she had shouted. The entire courtroom leaned forward as one, sensing they were about to witness something that would be replayed on social media for decades. Margaret's mouth was still hanging open, frozen in the moment between arrogance and absolute terror. In my 25 years on this bench, I have seen every variety of entitled, delusional, power-hungry bully who thinks their little bit of authority makes them untouchable. Judge Judy paused, letting the words sink in like poison into Margaret's consciousness. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Camera operators adjusted their angles, knowing they were capturing television history. Bailiff Byrd stood at attention, his face showing the kind of respect that comes from watching a master craftsman at work. Harold had tears in his eyes, finally seeing justice for not just himself but for every neighbor Margaret had terrorized over the years. And Margaret? Margaret was starting to realize that she had just poked a sleeping dragon with a nuclear warhead. Judge Judy took a step forward, her full presence commanding the courtroom like a general addressing troops before battle. But you, Margaret Stevens, you have just earned yourself a masterclass in what real consequences look like. You will sit down, you will shut up, and you will listen to me destroy every pathetic delusion you have about your imaginary power. And in case your criminal little brain is confused about who has authority in this room, I'm the judge here, not you. You're nothing but a neighborhood bully with a clipboard and a federal investigation breathing down your neck. The words hit Margaret like a physical blow. Her face went through a rainbow of emotions: shock, disbelief, rage, and finally, the dawning horror of someone who realizes they've just been publicly executed on national television. The courtroom erupted in barely contained gasps and murmurs, but no one dared to speak above a whisper. Margaret's hands were shaking so violently that she had to grip the back of the chair in front of her to keep from falling over. Judge Judy wasn't finished, but everyone knew the kill shot had already been fired. Margaret stood there like a statue, carved from pure humiliation, her entire world crashing down around her as Judge Judy prepared to deliver the final blow. The legendary judge returned to her seat with the measured pace of someone who knew she held absolute power over Margaret's fate. "Here's what's going to happen," Judge Judy announced, her voice carrying the finality of a death sentence. "I'm ruling in favor of Mr. Martinez for the full amount of his medical bills that you illegally tried to collect through fraudulent HOA fines. $23,000. Margaret's gasp was audible across the entire courtroom. But Judge Judy wasn't finished destroying Margaret's life. "Furthermore, I'm ordering a complete audit of your HOA's finances, and I'm recommending that the State Housing Authority investigate every single violation complaint filed against you." Margaret's knees buckled, and she had to grab the railing to keep from collapsing completely. The folder that had once represented her imagined authority now lay scattered across the floor like the remnants of her shattered reign of terror. Harold wiped tears from his eyes, finally seeing justice for his late wife's memory and for every neighbor who had suffered under Margaret's tyrannical rule. "And one more thing," Judge Judy continued, her voice carrying a hint of satisfaction that sent chills through the courtroom. "I'm forwarding this case file to the federal prosecutor's office. Embezzlement is a felony, ma'am, and you're looking at serious prison time." Margaret's face went from pale to gray to completely bloodless. She opened her mouth to protest, but no sound came out. The woman who had terrorized an entire neighborhood with her clipboard and manufactured authority had been reduced to a trembling, speechless shell of her former self. The gallery erupted in barely contained celebration. Residents from Margaret's neighborhood who had come to support Harold were crying tears of joy, finally free from years of harassment and illegal fines. Margaret stumbled toward the exit, her high heels clicking frantically against the courtroom floor as she tried to escape the cameras and the judgment of everyone watching. But there was no escaping what had just happened. In less than 30 minutes, Judge Judy had exposed Margaret's crimes, destroyed her authority, and delivered justice to every victim she had tormented. The neighborhood tyrant's reign was over, and justice had finally been served on a silver platter. As the courtroom doors swung shut behind Margaret's humiliated retreat, the atmosphere transformed from tense anticipation to pure celebration. Harold Martinez sat in stunned disbelief, his weathered hands covering his face as 20 years of grief finally found its resolution. The garden gnome that had started this entire legal battle wasn't just vindicated, it had become the symbol of resistance against neighborhood tyranny. Judge Judy stepped down from her bench, her stern expression softening as she approached Harold with something rarely seen in her courtroom: genuine compassion. "Mr. Martinez," she said quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder, "your wife would be proud of what you did here today." The impact of Margaret's downfall rippled through the community, like a tidal wave of liberation. Within hours of the episode airing, social media exploded with videos of the legendary seventh response, Judge Judy shutdown trending worldwide, as millions of viewers shared the moment when Margaret's reign of terror came crashing down. But more importantly, the real residents of Willowbrook Estates were finally free. Mrs. Chen could display her bird feeder without fear. The Rodriguez family's children could draw hopscotch squares on the sidewalk without facing $100 fines. Veteran Tom Mitchell could fly his American flag at whatever height honored his fallen brothers. The neighborhood that had lived in fear for nearly a decade was finally breathing freely. Margaret's empty HOA office became a symbol of liberation. The intimidating desk where she had crafted her harassment campaigns now sat vacant, her nameplate removed, her filing cabinet seized by federal investigators. The new interim president, a soft-spoken retired teacher named Eleanor Webb, had already announced the elimination of all illegal fees and the establishment of a community garden, right where Margaret had once banned decorative gnomes. The transformation was swift and complete, like watching sunlight break through storm clouds after years of darkness. 3 months after the courtroom showdown, Harold received a letter that brought tears to his eyes. The federal investigation had uncovered evidence of Margaret's crimes spanning back 7 years, affecting over 200 families. The restitution fund would return every penny of illegally collected fees with interest. But more than the money, Harold treasured the accompanying note from Judge Judy herself. "Justice isn't just about the law, Mr. Martinez. It's about making sure bullies never win. Your wife's garden gnome helped save an entire community." The ripple effects extended far beyond one neighborhood. Across the country, Homeowners who had suffered under tyrannical HOA presidents began filing complaints, armed with the knowledge that justice was possible. Legal aid organizations reported a surge in requests for help with HOA abuse cases. Margaret Stevens had unknowingly become the poster child for everything wrong with unchecked homeowner association power, and her public destruction had given courage to countless other victims. As for Margaret herself, the federal charges resulted in a plea deal: 18 months in federal prison, 5 years probation, and a lifetime ban from serving in any HOA capacity. She was forced to sell her house to pay restitution, moving to a small apartment 3 states away where no one knew her name or her shame. The woman who had once ruled with an iron fist over property values and community standards was now working part-time at a retail store, her dreams of authority forever shattered by 7 words from Judge Judy. "I'm the judge here, not you." The garden gnome that started it all still sits proudly in Harold's front yard, now accompanied by a small memorial plaque honoring his late wife. Neighbors frequently stop by to thank him for his courage, and children from the block often leave small flowers by the gnome's base. If this story of justice triumphing over tyranny inspired you to stand up against neighborhood bullies, subscribe and hit that notification bell, because we've got more care and takedown stories that prove justice always wins in the end. Sometimes it just takes one brave person and one powerful judge to change everything.